Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this event on online registration and voting. Let me introduce myself. First of all, my name is Jordi BARRAT. I am teaching law at the University Rovira Virgili in Catalonia, and I will be the facilitator, at least of the first part of the event. And then my colleague David DUENAS-CID will assume this role as a facilitator, also as speaker for the second part of the event. Let me share with you some very brief thoughts about the agenda and what we will talk today: online registration and voting. Just three ideas to launch the event. First of all, there are not new topics. I think most of us, we are talking about that over the last 1 decade, 2 decades: online registration, online voting, new voting technologies. The other day I saw an agenda where it said 21st century voting technologies. It was the first time I saw that. There are no new topics, but it's an evolving situation. It's a constantly evolving situation. Then we have to keep an eye on this, and because there are constantly new challenges, new opportunities, and it's because technology is changing. Second idea, the mixture of profiles. I think it's very important. It's a good decision from the organizers of this event. I mean, not me, the organizers. I'm the facilitator. Because if you see the panels of the panelists, and I had the opportunity to check the list of participants. You will see a very interesting, very fruitful, very useful mixture of profiles. We have IT people, computer scientists. We have people from social scientists, like legal experts, political scientists, from the sociology. By people from companies, from providers. It's very important to hear from them. And we also have people from electoral management bodies. I mean, the ones who will be in charge of defining the needs, the ones who will find to supervising and to implement. Then a successful implementation of this kind of technologies always need this mixture of approaches. And third idea that I would like to share with you as an initial step, as a first step, that I also like this the title. I mean, the title putting together online registration and online voting. New voting technologies encompass a wide range of different mechanism. From online registration, we can talk about the biometrics and other online registration, online authentication, biometrics, and other technologies. Of course, electronic voting, but in electronic voting there are different types of electronic voting, and we can go further and to the end of the electoral process, and then we will have the transmission, the tabulation, the results transmission systems, and the publication. All of these have been changing over the last years, and all of these now have e-enabled tools. Then we have to find the way to analyze each one of these technologies individually, because each one of these technologies have different needs, different methodologies, but then they cannot be analyzed, I mean, from an isolated point of view. They need to have a comprehensive. And here we are putting together at least two different technologies that could be useful to both goals: to know the specificities of each technology, but also be aware of the the things that they have in common. It's everything from me, and now I will assume the role of facilitator. Let me first of all thank the organizer, Foresight Democracy, the sponsor, Minsait, for this event, and the panelists, the speakers, and all the audience. Some instructions you will see that this tool have two different chats, one general chat where some of you are already participating, and then a Q&A tool. Here I will encourage you to write there your questions, and you can even vote for the questions you feel that are more necessary, that are more important. And then we will take I will take some of these questions, the most voted questions for the panelists. Then please write your questions, not in the chat, in the Q&A, in the Q&A tool, and then vote the questions you feel are more necessary. And as you have already seen, there is also a third tool. There are polls in order to know your feedback. What else? I think it's everything from my side. Then if I'm not, then let's go to the first session we have with Dr. RENIU. Josep Maria RENIU is a very good colleague, very good friend of mine, but unfortunately he will not be able to be with us today. And let me say why. I'm not sure she will agree, but let me say why she is not here with us, because he has been very recently appointed as a Spanish MP in the upper chamber of the Spanish MP. And then let's put this way, that he has other urgent priorities. No, I know that he would like to be with us today, because he's a very good researcher. He loves this kind of gatherings, but he could not change the agenda because it's very recent. Unfortunately, he's not with us today, but we have his intervention, his talk already recorded, and then I will share with you the talk. He will be sharing some thoughts about one very recent experience conducted within the Catalan government using online tools for the board, the representative board of farmers.
It's a pleasure to be here sharing with you some ideas, some reflections on a good practice, or at least what I think it's a good practice done by the Catalan government during the month of March this year. It was the first online elections for the representative of farmers. In fact, a very special process, basically because here in Catalonia we don't have still a unified or generalized using of internet voting. So it's really a first step within the public administration in Catalonia to implement these solutions. So basically we're talking about e-voting, as you surely know, and it means to cast a vote by electronic means. So in this sense, we all already know that it's just a new tool to cast votes, but obviously this new tool demands us some specific measures and requirements. So the difficult point is just to know which are these kind of measures, which are these kind of requirements, and then be able to apply them in order to conduct a fair election as well as traditional elections. What do we have here, basically? The option chosen by the Catalan government, the Secretary of Agriculture was to use remote voting. Remote voting by internet, and then using, as you can see, not only tablets, but also smartphones or directly using a computer. And some practical issues were involved in that process. On the first part, including the possibility of casting a blank vote, which is traditionally, when we talk about internet voting or e-voting in general, we usually don't consider as a necessary, as a compulsory element to include blank vote. In this case, obviously, we decided, or we advised to introduce this kind of blank vote, plus a random presentation of the different candidates, that it was a very specific decision, and in my opinion, I think it was a very good decision because of the competitiveness between the different candidates. The best option was not only to guarantee the correct presentation of each candidate in the electronic ballot, but also this random presentation. So trying to reduce any kind of suspicious around this formal presentation. Anyway, the legal requirements of the election included this element, this issue. Let's present in a random way all the candidates for any one of the voter. At the same time, and assuming that here in Catalonia we had 3 co-official languages, it was also one of the interesting points by using e-voting is that it allows you to organize a better way of casting a vote. That is, you can use, if you like, even audiovisual profiles or color logos instead of a regular ballot paper ballot. And in this case, the voter was allowed to choose if the voter decided to see the ballot in Catalan, in Spanish, or even in Aranese, in Occitan, which is the 3rd of co-official language in Catalonia. As a second point of these practical issues, I would like to point out that the legal decision calling for the elections included the need to have an external and independent technical audit. The reason was so simple. Usually with using e-voting, we face a problem of confidence not only by the voters, but also for the candidates. The idea was, let's reinforce confidence in those stakeholders, and let's appoint an external and independent firm to audit all the process in terms, obviously, of technical requirements for this e-voting solution. The third point is also so important because it has to see with voter registration. There were different ways for a voter to get registered, basically using digital signature platforms. For example, the Catalan platform, which is called IDCAT, which is promoted by the same administration that was ruling the process, and also one-use codes. One-use codes in 2 different ways. In the first way was really interesting because it was a biometrical registration. As you see here in these little pictures of a process from 0 to 6, the firm providing the voting solution, Minsait, offered as well a solution using biometric parameters to be registered. If a voter decided to cast his vote, I don't know, maybe from in the middle of the forest, by using a smartphone, and the smartphone wasn't not equipped with a digital signature system, he or she could do this kind of biometrical registration by showing, taking a picture of the ID, the regular ID, and then a selfie, and also a small video talking to the smartphone, and then a civil servant was confirming that the voter applying for a one-use code in order to cast a vote was the people who said with the ID and the video and the selfie. And the other way of using one-use codes was in in-person polling places that we'll see just later on. This four issue was that, and I think it's a good practice because allows people with some technical difficulties or maybe not being able to use this kind of solutions at home, for example, or whatever, having two different channels to cast a vote. Elsewhere, as we said, using your smartphone or your computer or whatsoever, and in in-person voting places with two members of two public servants from the administration, and the using of first a registration unit, checking they're present in the universal census, and then giving them a one-use code to be able to use the tablet for casting finally his or her vote. In the fifth point, we have to assume that there was a large number of voting places during the two-day process. In the previous elections run by traditional vote, there was more than 500 polling places. Remember, using only traditional vote, casting a vote in traditional polling places. And in this time, it was less than a half of these polling places, 275, and for the first day. For the second day, the process was run on the 25th and 36th of March. On the first day, there was around 275 polling places, in-person polling places, with these two members of the public administration giving support, technical support, and allowing the voters to cast finally a vote. And on the second day, the number was reduced to 70 in voting places, just in order to allow people who was unable to cast a vote on the 25th to be able to cast it on the 26th. Apart of that, it was only possible, as you can imagine, by using a universal census, no matter where you were, but within the territory of Catalonia, you were able to address to one of such 275 voting places and identify yourself, get registered, and then cast a vote. Which lessons do we learn from that process? Basically, we would like to point out that 5 basic points that drive us to call this process as a good practice. On the first, the relevance of the joint effort of all stakeholders, not only administration, not only the technological firm providing the e-voting solution, but also the candidates, the different groups of farmers presenting candidatures, and also, especially and more specifically, the voters. The voters that for the first time in history were changing radically from casting a vote in a traditional way to casting a vote by electronic means. So I would like to point it out because it's really difficult when you try to implement an e-voting solution, this high level of joint efforts. On the second point, it was, as we said previously, the legal obligation of an independent technical audit. In my opinion, that was one of the points best valued by all stakeholders. Not only the administration making all the efforts, but the existence of an external, an independent actor trying to analyze all the requirements, both from the administration process and the technical solution. On the third point, the universal census that allowed anybody casting a vote in whatever the place she were in Catalonia. A very interesting point by using the biometrical registration. Despite the number of voters that use it was really low, around 50 voters, the fact that has been used in this kind of process opens the possibility to spread it within the public administration, participatory processes, electoral processes, with the final goal to use it in political binding elections. Obviously, we'll have to wait long for that, but it was interesting, and at least I wanted to point it out. Finally, obviously, the existence of in-person voting places to support those voters with no technical abilities, with no capabilities to use a smartphone, for example. Imagine we are talking about people with high level of ages, around more than 60s, 70s. So we need to help them, to assist them in order to be able to cast a vote. There was different questions only to consider for future, some modifications or minor modifications for future processes. For example, I will suggest to increase voting days. One of the strong arguments for using e-voting is not only breaking a space, but also breaking the time. And so I suggested to use it at least for a week, from Monday to Friday, but was not possible at this time. But for future elections, I will suggest to increase voting days. Also to develop, to implement a campaign to promote that more voters have a digital ID. Obviously, it's not a question related only to this kind of process, but also for the functioning of the public administration here in Catalonia. The process of suggesting the citizens to have a digital ID is running right now, but we have to reinforce this kind of campaigns. And obviously, it's also interesting to think about how to improve the role of the candidates in terms of technological delegates. One of the key elements to guarantee an e-voting process is not only all the questions we have already saw, but also to introduce the role of a technological delegate, not only an electoral delegate for each candidature, but also people with technological knowledge in order to guarantee, or at least to audit from the different candidates that the process is going right and the process is going well. And finally, some questions that could be at least reconsidered, taking as a reference this kind of process held in Catalonia. Basically, two questions, and not so minor questions, but improving the usability of hardware use in voting places. I'm making reference basically to the size of the tablets using by casting the vote in the in-person voting places. It was really a small tablet with, and if you just think about the people casting a vote, in this case farmers, they used to work with hands, and hands are bigger than the normal population. So it seems a silly thing, but it's not. So for the next process in this area, we have to think in a bigger way when using the tablet, for example. And another question that it needs to be improved is the generation and using and checking all the voting receipts. In this case, it was not a critical question, but for the next processes, it will be a question to keep in mind, and also to offer a more flexible, a more quick way to not only to check the electoral receipt, rather than to get the electoral receipt and send it, for example, to an email, or even to print it in a voting place. In any case, a very interesting experience, and I hope it will be of interest as well for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jose Maria, for this interesting talk. And then right now we will go to the first panel. And then as a first step, I will give the floor, but for just 1 minute, to the 4 panelists we have, for giving them the chance to introduce themselves, their profiles, the affiliation, and the main features. Just 1 minute, and then we will start the profile. Then maybe we could start with Pablo Sarrias. Pablo, please.
Hello. It's great being today here. I want to thank all the panelists and the organization for organizing this interesting session. Of course, you know, we are also sponsoring it because we thought it was a very interesting agenda. My name is Pablo Sarrias. I'm Director at Electoral Processes Division of Minsait. Yeah, and we will be sharing our experiences with you. I was happy to see that the first talk was about one of our projects, so we will talk more about that later. So,
thank you, Pablo. Ronan, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ronan McDermott. I'm not affiliated with anyone. I'm an independent elections and technology consultant, and have worked globally and in many countries where technology plays a greater or lesser role, but clearly the trend is there, and it's a pleasure to be here today, and I look forward to the discussions. Thanks.
Thanks, Ronan. Arne, please.
Good morning.
Okay.
My name is Arne KOITMAE, and I am the head of Estonian State Electoral Office. And amongst other things, we are also responsible for conducting internet voting since 2005. So we have some experience in this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Arne, and the final panelist for this first step. Alinani, please. Alinani.
Good morning. Good morning here. My name is Lenani Simchimba. I'm from Zambia. I'm the IT manager at the Electoral Commission of Zambia. We've had some experience with online registration of voters. We are currently in an election period. We have our elections in the next, general elections in the next 8 weeks. And so we just completed our voter registration process, which part of it was done through online means. So that's basically a brief of where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Alinani. Very, very interesting. These upcoming elections there in Zambia. And then, as we are in a panel, I have been told that I have to launch and give you some questions. And there will not be a formal presentation from every one of you, but just a panel. I mean, one question, and we will move. We are not obliged, of course, to answer the questions. We can proceed with different issues. But maybe as a first issue, to give to the audience a clear overview of what we are talking about. Of course, this first panel is focused on online registration. I mean, let's remember the title, Building on the Successful Implementation of Online Registration for Elections. Then we'll have later on another panel more focused on online voting. This would be online registration. And as I have already said before, technologies are evolving. Even now, Josep Maria from Catalonia, he was presenting us some new technologies regarding face recognition, biometric recognition. And maybe the first question would be for the panelists, could you provide us a very brief, examples, ideas of the very latest developments and new challenges of online registration? I insist, very brief. I mean, we're talking about maybe 2-3 minutes each. We can follow the same sequence. Pablo, please.
Okay, so online registration has evolved quite a lot over the years, yeah. And one thing that is important to understand with online registration is that it's a new process that is being used more and more, but it's used to replace another kind of registration that is normally the registration that you have in embassies and places, consulates for people voting from abroad. Yeah, online registration for voting in country is not that usual. We did use it in the Catalan elections that Dr. RENIU was talking before, because it was the first time that electronic voting was going to be used. And we realized that in order to be able to do electronic voting, you need to have a registration with some data from voters that would help having a better experience. Yeah. So if you have a cell phone, you can send them a reminder, you can send them the voting receipt and so on. Yeah. If you have the email, you could do the same. And for the elections from the farmers, for example, that information was not there. And it was thought that it was probably a good way of doing it, setting up an online voter registration system for those that would like to vote from home and not going to a polling place. As the professor said, it was quite surprising that there was very few voters that opted for that option. But reality was that something had not been considered, and this collective of farmers, they are all small companies, and they are one-person companies, most of them. And as such, in Spain, every one-person company, they have a digital certificate. So most of these farmers, they already had a digital certificate and they knew how to use it. So when it came to the voting, we had a tremendous use of digital certificates and very few of the online voter registration. So it is very important to understand the profile of your voters, yeah, to provide them with the tools they need to register. Now, when it comes into the voters living abroad, yeah, they are probably not having a digital certificate from the mother country, and that's where online voter registration makes a lot of sense. And this is because otherwise you have to travel to the embassies and consulates, and sometimes distances are really far away and it becomes very expensive and cumbersome. So they end up not voting. Today, most people have access to cell phones, and biometric systems are improving. So it's good to use the cell phones to help with online voter registration. For example, in the solutions we are doing, not only for voting, but also for banks and so on, we have a system where we are asking the voters to take a selfie, then take a picture of their ID card or passport, yeah, and then put it in front of them while they are speaking their names. So we have artificial intelligence checking that it's not a robot moving the mouth and so on. But then at the end, we always give that information to a human being, to a civil officer that makes a final decision. The artificial intelligence will make a recommendation. We have this confidence that the documents seem authentic, that the person seems authentic and so on, but the decision is from the human. And if the human is not convinced, that person will have to go to the consulate. So I think we really need to have this combination of remote and not remote to try to make the life as easy as possible for the voters. And I don't want to take all the time here, so I'm happy to discuss with the panel later on as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Pablo. And since is not obliged to intervene in all the elections, but next one would be Ronan, if you please.
Thank you, and thank you, Pablo, for answering. From the professor's presentation earlier, I thought I heard that it was a civil servant who actually confirmed, and so that human intervention is, if you like, the piece of the jigsaw for integrity there. I look forward very much to hearing from Alinani on the Zambian experience. The evolution from voter registration online has been in the past voter registries online to facilitate the public scrutiny of voter lists in order to help people correct errors and in order to grow stakeholder confidence in those lists. So that's the historical, and in various countries they are online and there are ways to access them. They are also online indirectly through things like SMS and USSD and so on. The next level, of course, then is the use of online mechanisms to actually register. And again, I look forward to hearing about Zambia, but the evolution mental. The initial registration, the bar is very high for identity, and therefore that initial registration, the first contact you have with the civil authority or with the elections management authority, where you bring a lot of documentation and so on. And once you're registered, once you've passed that initial identity threshold, the challenge then is how can we, having who you are and the legitimacy of your identity, how we can allow you to make amendments to your registration. And the two most obvious examples of that globally would be where you move house from one constituency to another and you have to change your place of registration and which polling station that you will vote in. The second one is obviously where, for example, you get married and you change your name or so on. So this idea that online voter registration becomes a means to simplify and streamline and make life easier for changes to a pre-existing registration. That's the case here in Ukraine, where they moved certain minor changes of polling station, moved those online to facilitate. But the challenge remains, and I think when I heard the number of 50 people in Catalonia availed of that mechanism, so that's great. So there was a civil servant who only had to handle 50. Now put 1 million behind that, and you realize that from a practitioner's point of view, from an elections management body point of view, to have to put human resources behind 50 million or 5 million such registrations, that becomes a major challenge. So I think we're in this twilight zone between online, some functionality, but not the core registration functionality. So I look forward to hearing very much from Alinani and others. Clearly Estonia has a different experience as well, but that's my comment, this evolution from just putting voter lists online to facilitate scrutiny, right through to some future point where the entirety of the registration process can be done online. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Ronan. We follow with ARNE from Estonia, please.
Thank you. If we now discuss Estonian experience, then we have not really had an online registration phase for voters as such. I think it pays to think about what's the goal or the ultimate goal when you implement online registration. So in Estonia, we moved away from a specific voters register, and nowadays all voter data is included in the population register. So we have, so to speak, a permanent register of voters, which is updated also between elections. So when elections come, people don't necessarily have to do anything. So at some point, it pays to think ahead. So what will the ultimate solution be? And if you have a permanent voter register with data that is being updated, then you can start thinking about other new technologies as well, like electronic voter lists or even internet voting. Of course, you have to. Of course, in Estonia, if you want to change your data, then you can do it online, and you can sign your data digitally. So that solution is also present in Estonia. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Arne, and now Alinani. But first, let me remember that to all audience that we have this tool, Q&A tool. We have the chat. We have for general chats, general comments. We have the polls, but we have also Q&A, and we have only one question so far, and it's not real from Hamza Fasafiri, but it's not related to online registration. It's related to online voting. Then if I may, I will forward this question to David for the second panel. But please, I mean, if there are any questions, please use this Q&A tool and vote for the question, and I will take the questions you will be posting. And yeah, finally, for this first question regarding latest developments and challenges in relation to online registration, I give the floor to Alinani from Zambia, please.
Thank you, Jordi. So I'll start with the goal, or what made us make the decision to get to the online registration. Basically, because of the pandemic, we had a short timeline in which to start a register from scratch. So we are starting to register. We are getting rid of the old register of voters and coming up with a new one as the law provides, as well as we wanted to see more engagement of the youth. Now, these are people who are normally not interested, at least for the Zambian context. Very few youth are interested when it comes to things of voting and the like. And so, since the majority using smartphones and the like, we thought this will also engage them as well. In terms of the challenges that we faced, I think the biggest issue we had was stakeholder buy-in before the technology and everything is put in place, but just convincing stakeholders that this technology would actually help us and it would actually be good to bring more people on board stakeholders in terms of political parties, civil society. I think many people are concerned with issues to do with security and safety of their data. Ideally, the way this process worked, and I think Ronan pointed this out, it is not fully online, because for it to be fully online, there are certain challenges with the law. There are certain things that the law specifies. For example, one would need to physically get a card from a registration officer. So some of these issues would have to be rewritten, or these parts of the law, to allow someone to just go ahead and do a full registration online. So I guess that's one of the challenges that we faced. Ideally, our system or the platform that we put up enabled someone to capture an image of themselves, filling all the biographic data, and give us a scan of their national ID. And when the registration period was open, they would simply go to registration center, find their record there, have their biometrics captured, and get their card. So we reduced the amount of time it would take to register one voter from 9 minutes to 3 minutes, which meant we could process more people, and this in a shorter period of time, helping us capture more voters. And so that was the implementation. So from this implementation, again, it was attributed on the back end. We had people that needed to scrutinize these records that were coming in, just to look out for people who are trying to abuse the system. Another challenge that we had, this being Africa, is of course connection issues when we talk of the internet. Mostly only people in urban areas were able to use the platform effectively, and we saw more numbers of people in the urban areas. Then also another challenge was ease of the application in terms of its intuitiveness. Of course, we tried as much as possible to make it as intuitive as possible and easy as possible in just 3-4 steps for you. But of course, other people did find a challenge. I've already mentioned this, but the law, we had to change a number of regulations in order for us to allow this process to be done online. And I think that is one of the, apart from stakeholder engagement, the issues to do with regulations, again, were another impediment to us fully implementing what was planned. So in a nutshell, this was the experience we had, and I would say overall it was good. We had close to just slightly above 12% of people registering online. That is about 800,000. And this was a start. And so we expect that going forward, since now people are comfortable with this technology, we see an increase in the number the next time that we roll out this sort of registration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alinani. And then maybe, I don't know, because we are in the panel, maybe Ron and Pablo, Arne, if you have any comments to our colleagues, they will be very much welcome. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to follow up on something that Mr. McDermott had said for Ronan. Yeah, so asking how do you scale from the 50 people that register to the 50 million. Yeah? The question is not. I don't think the question is not that. Is how many people and locations you need to register the 50 million if they all go on site. Yeah, because if they do it remotely, you're going to need people to process that, but it's going to be a batch process, and you have a queue and you have a time to process. If they have to all go to a place to register, yeah, that's huge, and that's what Alinani was saying. Yes, so they reduced the time from 9 minutes per person to 3 minutes by doing it half of the process online. Yes, so they took the biographics online and the picture, and then the biometrics on site, and that's a great approach, and I'm really happy to learn about it. I didn't know you had this experience in Zambia. I want to congratulate you for that. It's amazing. Yeah, that's making the life of the voters easy. Yeah, the electoral commissions they have to make sure that everybody can access the vote. Yeah, so making these channels, normally they are additional channels available. They will help reduce the queues and support everybody. Of course, then we have all the countries in more old Europe that we are not using an active registration. We have more passive registration, like Estonia or Spain, yeah, where just by having your national ID card, you are registered to vote. So you have to keep your ID card updated, yeah, but then you are in the voter list automatically, and that's a different kind of story. But that's really thinking on online voter registration as an additional channel to help voters in those places where active registration is required. Yeah. So.
Yeah, let me just, I agree entirely, and that's why I was looking forward and delighted to hear Anani describe the Zambian experience. I wasn't fully aware of it, but you confirmed, Anani, it was that separation of, but the reduction from 9 minutes to 3 minutes per voter, that's a significant saving. And even if only 800,000 people did it, that's a lot of minutes, and that then reduces the effort required. But you know, in a transitional process, we will evolve from one to the other. I think if Zambia, you know, you spoke about the stakeholder confidence and the stakeholder acceptance and buy-in. I think if you'd switch the process to an entirely online one, the stakeholder buy-in would not have been there. So this idea of an incremental and evolutionary approach is the one where you build stakeholder confidence. You've got 12% this time, it could be 50% the next time, as people realize the convenience of making that initial registration process. I think if we look over the horizon, I think the idea of setting up voter registration centers in every village, in every town, and every polling station, every polling center, which is a traditional model for active voter registration. If you could see a future model in some country where that human intervention could even happen live, rather than asynchronously, where you just submit something to a server and then it's reviewed by a human. But you could physically separate the human from the voter, meaning you could have data centers in locations where it's convenient to place those data centers, and election management body officials who they're not traveling to every community, but they are facilitating the complete process. So you could have a more efficient human adjudicated voter registration process, but where the voter is not sitting physically opposite the desk from the official who is adjudicating their application and so on. So you know, all of these things are, I think, the technology enables that. Because you know, we hear about telemedicine and we hear about other uses of the internet, but I think voter registration that still involves a human official with the voter, that has a future in certain countries. But no, I agree entirely with you, Pablo, about the scaling up. It is very, very much feasible.
Thanks a lot. Maybe I don't know, Arne, Linani, anything to add to the comments so far? Or we move to another topic. Okay. Then we have just, let's see, 6 minutes to the end of our panel, and at half past, depending on the time zone, half past. And I have to say that at half past I will have to leave. But I have another, because we had different subtitles in the agenda. Let me introduce a new topic, and let's cover the topic very briefly, 2 minutes each, about the procurement challenges regarding the procurement. I think if we see the panelists, we have a very, very, very useful, because we have different profiles. We have the electoral management bodies who will be in charge of the procurement in terms of references, transparency, and so on. We have the company, one company, but I mean from the voice, the say from the private sector, and we have an independent expert, independent consultant that they are supposed also to be involved in this process. Then let's. What are your takes in this regard? I mean, how to achieve a successful, efficient transparency? I mean, we can add more adjectives, no, to a procurement when it comes to, of course, new voting technology in general, but for this panel, specific requirements for online voting. We can follow the same sequence, Pablo, please.
Well, I think it's best if the officials talk first this time.
Okay. Okay, let's just start the other way around. Then Alinani.
All right. I think this should be thought out way in advance and started early enough in terms of what equipment you're going to use, and this is from end to end. What applications are you going to develop, again, from end to end? Because most of the registration equipment, we find that you still have the capture kit that is used in the field, and once the data gets back, you still need to run AFIS or ABIS on the data that has been captured. And usually, from my experience, but I beg to get others' views, you don't have usually one company that is able to do both. And so you need to engage different companies for you to come up with that end-to-end process. So early engagement before you procure to get your requirements right, I think really helps really helps you get the desired end results from our experience.
Sorry, I was muted. Then maybe we could go with ARNE in the two EMBs, and then give the floor to the other ones. ARNE, please.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Alinani said. Well, one thing to consider is also cooperation with other governmental institutions. So election administration doesn't have to build everything from scratch. So we can benefit from other institutions' work as well at this point.
Thank you, Arne. And now let's say Ronan, and give the final say to the
private sector. That's okay.
They have to know the terms of references. They have to know. I mean, I agree with Paul. They have to know, because otherwise they cannot.
Absolutely. In terms of voter registration, this could be said for e-voting too as well. But voters list, voter registration is conceptually simple. It's a list of who's eligible to vote, and it should exclude those who are not eligible to vote. So the conceptual simplicity is often lost in the rush for technology. It's never really about the technology. In terms of procurement, it's about the institution tasked with implementing the technology. You know, the institution, the elections management body, and I'm not just saying this because Alinani is on the talk, that the elections management body in Zambia has significant years and decades of experience with technology, and they know what they want and they know how to procure it. There are entire countries such as Estonia, where the use of technology in e-governance and those solutions are, again, mature and decades old, and that cooperation that Arne speaks of, it pre-exists. There are also countries where the EMB are significantly poor in terms of their human capacity, in terms of technology, and in terms of procurement. And it's into that vacuum that money is sometimes poured, and a government wants to do something, and then you have a procurement problem. You have the potential for a failed procurement because the capacity to absorb the technology is not there in the institution. So it's not a question of this technology is good or bad. It's really about the institution and therefore the country. So you have to look in a holistic way. If you're a government, oftentimes procurement is a government gives a big bag of money to the elections management body and says, here, go do this. Whereas I think wise governments sit down and talk with their elections management body and their civil registries and figure out genuinely what is required. And the last comment I will make is that communication between governments and elections management bodies on what exactly needs to be procured, that should be broadened in scope to include the other stakeholders. Stakeholder buy-in on any solution, be it a voter registration solution or be it an electronic voting solution. If you do not get stakeholder buy-in early on, the procurement will also be problematic. So final thought, elections procurement, it will always take longer than you think, and it will always cost more than you think. So prepare early, as Alinani says. Get started as early as humanly possible and make sure you have the resources, because if an elections procurement ends up being more expensive, the consequences of that are money is taken away from other important aspects of elections management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronan. And then let me say goodbye, because as I already announced, I had another meeting and half past, and one of the disadvantages of these remote meetings, that when you show up maybe 2 minutes, then it's you are too late. It was not the case for in-person meetings. No, this is one of the disadvantages of new technologies. But okay, we have my very good colleague and friend David DUENAS-CID, who will assume the role as facilitator of this panel. And let me thank all of you, organizers, panelists, and audience, and see you in another similar event. Bye-bye, have a nice day.
Thank you, Jordi.
Bye. So I will just take my final comments on the question on the procurement. Yeah, from the private sector. Yeah, what we like from procurement is when the procurement is focused on the process. Yeah, so if we are participating in our procurement for online registration, yeah, we want to understand what needs to be done. So when we get an RFP that it says we want to buy 10,000 devices with a camera of 8 megapixels, this memory, this operating system version 5.0, and so on, this doesn't help at all. Yeah, from the private system, from the private sector, that's really, really frustrating, because the objective is not the technology. The objective is the human process, the voter registration. So what we really need to see from the private sector is we need a solution to help us register voters, and we have to have this quality of images. We need to have this quality of fingerprints recorded, and so on. If we do that with a camera of 8 megapixels, 12 or 6, should be relevant. Yeah. Or the version of the operating system, because that is just showing vendor lock-in. Yeah, we have got some presentation, we've seen some brochures, and we are just copying pasting. That makes, for the private sector, that makes really little sense and generates a lot of problems afterwards with all the procurement process. So we think what's important on the procurement is the process and the objective of what needs to be achieved. Not if the operating system is version 5, 5.0 or 7. Not please, if that message is getting anywhere, yeah. Focus always on what you need to achieve, not on the details of the technology. And that's really my take. Yeah.
Thank you, Pablo, and thank you, Jordi, for giving me the floor. I will introduce myself later, but I think it's more important now to close a bit this session, and as I will have later another session, I will have time to say a bit who I am. So I know that we still have like 7 minutes before closing that, and I would just like to pass one question that we received in the Q&A that I would just like to remind to all of you, to all the audience, that please put your questions there and we will try to use them. And I will pass this question to Alinani. It would be interesting to hear how Zambia went about engaging key stakeholders to support the partial online VR process, and how the ECZ, the EMB, is collaborating with the Civil Registration Authority to eliminate ghost or fraudulent registrations, which have been some of the key issues in the past elections. You can, if it was not clear, Alinani, you can just read also the question in the Q&A, but the question was referred to you, so I give you the word.
All right, thank you, Dismas, and good to see you. I hope you're the Dismas I'm thinking of. So I'll start with our civil registry. So the current situation in Zambia is that our civil registry is not yet fully digitized, as opposed to the EMB, which is fully digitized. And of course, that is a story for another day. But because of that, you find that the civil registry sometimes could have a duplicate, maybe a registration card. And because of that, on our side, the registration number is a mandatory requirement before we register. And so what we've done is just introduced a voter card number, which we are in charge of to ensure that we do not have any duplicates. And of course, in addition to this, you're talking of the ghost voters. And so this was largely to the fact that the cleaning of the register, removing deceased, has been a major challenge because of the same issue of the civil registry not being digitized. And this is why this time around, the law has actually stated every 10 years, we start the register from scratch. So we discard the old register and we have a new register of voters. And so this is one of the interventions, of course, that is being used to get rid of the deceased voters. In addition, we are signing MOUs with other organizations in the Ministry of Health that have access to this data so that we can also cross-reference with our database. In terms of stakeholder engagement and support, I think when we have a new technology, the first thing is people are skeptical and they don't want anything to do with it. And so most of our outreach was based on where are we coming from, and just showing stakeholders that technology has improved from 1996 to where we are today. We are coming from using OMR forms to using a kit, a biometric registration kit that's capturing 1 fingerprint. And now we are using a biometric registration kit that's capturing 10 fingerprints. And so we take them through this journey and just explain to them to say, look, at each point there was resistance. And even, yes, now there's resistance, but here are the benefits to the systems that you're now comfortable with. In terms of support, of course, some will fully support. Others, of course, took time to get on board. But I'm glad to say that once most political parties realized the advantage of the system, they went flat out and encouraged their voters, especially the youths, to use these platforms in order to vote. And so we continue to engage these stakeholders and slowly bring them on board.
Can I just add one thought to that, if I may, David?
Sure, please, go on.
In his earlier presentation, the good professor spoke of the technology delegates. And that was the equivalent, the technology equivalent of a party or candidate agent. That's a lovely idea, and I think could be embraced in many environments where for each political party or each NGO or each citizen observer group and so on, they might identify and appoint an individual who would be sufficiently technologically skilled, but who could act as the liaison between that stakeholder and the elections management body. Many EMBs have consultative forums where on a monthly or quarterly basis they meet with political parties in particular. But these are often political meetings. But wherever I've seen a specific technology engagement between elections management bodies and stakeholders, particularly political parties, that flow of technology information between the EMB and stakeholders, if it's done right and done sufficiently far in advance of an election, can help avoid crises and controversies that arise through ignorance And I mean no disrespect to political parties when I say sometimes their own ignorance is problematic. I mean no disrespect to journalists when I say sometimes the media, their ignorance of the technology is an obstacle to effective communication and to diffusing problems before they become political crises. So that idea of technology delegate in the opening presentation, I think, is an excellent one, and it helps build bridges between those who use the technology, that's the ENB, and the other electoral stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Alinani, and thank you so much, Ronan, for your last words. There is still another question, but I think we have no time for that. The question was brought by Olive Kansanga, but maybe Alinani, you would like to answer that in the chat later on, because we are running out of time in this particular panel. So then I would like to thank to all of you, to Pablo SARRIAS, Ronan McDERMOTT, ARNE KOITMAE, and Alinani Simuchimba, sorry for my spelling, for your interesting insights on the topic. And I know that Arne will have to stay because he's also participating in another panel later, and that Pablo needs to stay because he will be speaking now. But I would like to give you the chance to say goodbye to the audience, and yeah, see you soon. Please, if you want just to say goodbye to everybody.
So, thank you for your time and your attention. It's always a pleasure to be in this kind of panels.
Thank you, and have a nice day.
Okay, so then let me introduce myself because I just stepped in a bit unexpectedly. I mean, I was expected to step in now, not in the middle of the session. But anyway, I am David Duenas. I am assistant professor in Kozminski University in Poland and fellow researcher in University of Tartu in Estonia. And I am making my research on internet voting, and that's also one of the reasons why I was brought in this particular seminar and in this particular topic. So once we made my short and brief presentation, I would like to bring the attention to the next thing in our agenda, which is there is now one presentation that it will be conducted by Pablo SARRIAS, who was already speaking now on online voting for the 21st century, discover the possibilities of remote voting via the internet. And after that, I mean, there could be the option that if you would like to put some question for him, we can try to use the question to bridge between his presentation and the further panel that will start afterwards. So if you would like to ask some question to him, just put it in the Q&A. And it could be an excellent way to make a smooth transition to the next step. So Pablo, if you would like, please feel free to start with your presentation. We will be happy to.
Okay, let me see if I can share. Okay, so are you guys seeing the PowerPoint?
Yep, it's visible.
Perfect. Okay, good. So thank you again, everybody, for this opportunity. I will just take a few minutes talking about online voting on the year 2021. Yeah, so online voting for the 21st century. I think we will all agree that in the 20th century there was no online voting, so it's all the experiences are from this century. Now, I just have one introductory slide about who we are, so that to position ourselves, but then I will talk more generics about the internet voting. So I am Pablo SARRIAS, as you all know, from the Indra company, Minsait, that's the IT branch. And we've been doing elections for over 42 years, since 1978. And since 2004 or 5, something like that, we've been doing also a lot of internet voting projects. We work in over 42 countries right now on elections. Yeah, and we have a lot of customers in this area. Our company is very large. We do lots of things. We are 48,000 people. Yeah, doing all kinds of IT things, and one of the things we do is elections. So when we come into the world of elections, we think elections is a process among human beings. So technology is there to help, but it's not the objective by itself. And that has to always be taken into consideration. So all our vision on elections is how we make a process that is fully transparent, that is auditable, that is secure, that is trusted, so that the results are legitimate. Because when we talk elections, we are not having a solution or a system or a process in place to decide or to help countries decide who's won an election. What we have is a solution that is doing that, but it's doing something that is even more important, is convincing all the ones that have not won that they have really not won, yeah, that the election was done properly. And that's the difficult part, convincing the ones that lost. And in order to do that, you have to have solutions in place that are really transparent and auditable. So now we are talking today about internet voting. And here in the panel, we are seeing that that's a question, guaranteeing the properties of face-to-face voting with internet voting. That's really something that is quite hard to do, because internet voting is really not replacing face-to-face voting. It's a solution to replace postal voting. So it's an unsupervised voting from remote places. It's not voting from a polling place. And therefore, it will never be the same. It's a different story. So what we need to understand when it comes into internet voting is that we want to replace a process that has lots of security flaws with something that is better, yeah, and that it does things better. But we have to compare peers with peers and apples with apples. So internet voting from home is not the same as face-to-face voting in a polling place, and it will never be, because it's unsupervised. So we need to understand what are the threats of internet voting. And when we look at the threats, in my slide, that's the left side, yeah, I think you can see my mouse as well. So this part here, the threats of internet voting, if we look at them, elimination of votes, voter coercion, vote buying, violation of the voter privacy, these are threats of a remote voting system. Those threats are there both for internet voting as for postal voting. There is no difference. So where is the difference on internet voting? Well, you have two main differences. One is that when it comes into internet voting, you're going to be storing your votes in a database, most likely. So you have the risk of having an attack to the totality of the election if somebody enters that database and changes things or deletes everything. So you have this risk of attacking the totality. When you are doing postal voting, if you want to attack the totality of the election, you will have to burn lots of bags of postal ballots, and that's really going to be hard to do. Yeah. The other thing that you have in internet voting is that you have the usual threat of the internet. So you have hacking threats, viruses, denial of services, phishing, all these kind of things that we are all living with nowadays. So all these need to be taken into consideration. So how you do this in the year 2021? So there is not a single solution that solves one problem. So what you need is to set up an architecture and a protocol, a cryptographic way of doing things to solve the overall problems in a way that is consistent. Yeah, and also you need to have traditional internet protection systems that I have in the next slide, but of course those you need to do anyway. Yeah, the antiviruses, the firewalls, and so on that you need, but they are not specific for elections, so I'm not covering them here. So let's see what things you can do on the year 2021 that are really relevant for elections. First of all, privacy of the voter. That's an important one. So in order to ensure the privacy of the voter, we are going to use cryptography. We are going to have the voter decide what they want to vote and encrypt that information and send it to the voter. Now, if this information is afterwards deciphered in a way that you can link the voter to the deciphered information, you can link the voter, and that they lose the privacy. So a good way of avoiding that is having the voter encrypt the vote, but then getting the results without deciphering the individual votes. And that's what you get with this nice word here, homomorphic encryption. Homomorphic encryption allows you to get the voters encrypt the votes, but then getting the results without decrypting the votes is something quite amazing. So what you do is you add all the votes that are encrypted and you decrypt the results. That's a very, very interesting property. And that's something that every voting system in 2021 should do. Second one is still, you don't want the voters and the encrypted votes to be linked. Yeah, even if you are not going to decrypt them individually, yeah, but you don't want anybody to have the temptation to do so. So the other thing that you're going to do is guarantee the integrity of those votes. So those votes are authentic, but not telling the voting server who the voter is. And that you do using blind signatures and digital certificates. So every voter, when they logged in and they get authenticated, and with biometrics, with double factor authenticators, with you name it, that's one of the challenges of internet voting. Once you authenticate the voter, you assign the voter a blind certificate, and the voter will use this blind certificate to protect their homomorphically encrypted vote and send it to the voting server. Third thing you need to do is not allowing anybody to have the keys to decipher those votes. So you have to put those keys inside a high security model, and you have to have a group of custodians that share a secret to allow that high security model to work and decipher the vote. So having the proper key management is key. Next thing, you want to make sure that whatever gets into the database is not altered. And in order to do that, you need something that cannot be changed. In the old days, in banks, we used to see all these printers, matrix printers, printing on a big roll of paper that were having all transactions written in there, so nobody could delete a transaction without breaking the paper. This today has evolved, and in order to do that, what we do is using blockchain technology. Blockchain technology is a technology where you have a number of computers receiving the same information at the same time and jointly signing it in a way that no single computer can delete or modify that information. Now, it is important for the blockchain technology to be secure, is that those computers, they are not controlled by the same entity. Otherwise, you lose a bit of the security it provides. It's better if you have different stakeholders controlling some of the nodes. Now you have the tools to have information that cannot be modified. So what do you put in there? You don't want to write the encrypted votes inside the blockchain to protect them. That could be a solution. But if you do that, every node in the blockchain will receive the vote. So you will start by making copies of a voted ballot, and that's illegal in many places. So you don't want to do that. So what you're going to have is when the voter reaches the server, you're going to digitally sign by the server that vote as well, and you will place a signature on the blockchain. In this way, every stakeholder that has access to the blockchain can check that the signatures of the votes in the ballot box match the signatures of the votes in the blockchain. No additions, no deletions, no modifications. You have a complete transparency of what's going on. You can also place in the blockchain activities like somebody logged, some administrator logged into the system, the custodians open the ballot box, the custodians open the election, they close the election, the configuration was changed. So all relevant election events you can have on the blockchain as well. Now, I was saying before that authenticating the voter is the biggest challenge. We saw it in Catalonia, that we had this biometric registration that would give a one-time link. So that's a password that can be only used once. So if somebody steals this password, the real voter, when tries to vote, he will see that his password has been used, so he can request a new one and request the previous one to be voided. Yeah, so that's a possibility. You can have digital certificates, like in Estonia with the ID card that they use. You could have a distribution of two-factor authenticator by SMS. So there's lots of ways of doing the authentication of voters. The challenge is having enough ways that are useful and usable by all voters, because you need to grant the right to vote to everybody. So you need to make sure you have enough channels and enough ways of authenticating voters so that nobody gets disenfranchised. And that's the real challenge when it comes into online voting. And here we have this last item, the multi-voting. Multi-voting means that you can allow voters to cast more than one vote over the internet and only count the last one. And this is good if you think that voters can be coerced, forced to vote for somebody, then afterwards they can go again and vote for whoever they want. Or if there is the temptation of doing vote buying, yeah, you pay somebody to vote for you, but then this person afterwards can go and vote for somebody else. This is in theory really good. In practice, what it happens is that when you close the ballot box, you're going to have 10,000, 100,000 votes in there, but you will only count 800 or 80,000, and 20,000 of the votes that are in the ballot box, you're not going to count because some voters voted more than once. This, if it's not very well explained, it will get in a big headline on the news. And that's something you want to avoid. So if you want to do multi-voting, it has to have in parallel a really, really strong education campaign in the media, so that everybody understands that in the ballot box there's going to be more votes than voters, and that not every vote will be counted because the voters have the right to change their mind. And that's really, really relevant, and it's very important to inform. And then last but not least, you have the voter verifiability and the universal verifiability. The voter verifiability is letting the voter check that his vote was cast correctly and it was placed on the ballot box and it was counted. And that you can do by, today, there are many ways of doing it, yeah, but one simple way of doing it today is providing the voter with the signature of his vote or her vote that is placed on the blockchain, and giving an independent way of querying the blockchain for all the signatures that are placed of the votes on the ballot box, so that you can query and see if any of the signatures that are placed on the blockchain matches his signature. So this gives the voter the guarantee that his vote is there. When it comes into universal verifiability, that's something for auditors of the system to do. Yeah. In the universal verifiability, what you want to make sure is the whole count was done properly. As we are saying, we are not going to be decrypting all the votes. We will use homomorphic encryption. So you need to make sure that's done properly. And that you can do with some mathematical complex operations. If you have auditors that are from a university of mathematics, they can do that, yeah? With some properties that call zero knowledge proof, something like that. The other way of doing it is just going into deciphering all the votes and checking the result is okay. That's a very slow process and it will take time. And also it has to be done together with a mixing process that will mix all the votes, so that you don't know this encrypted vote represents this decrypted vote. Otherwise, you could risk a bit the privacy of the voting process, and you don't want that. So 2021, you can really do lots of things to make online voting much more secure than postal voting, probably very close to what's face-to-face voting. Yeah? But remember, it's not the same. So we cannot ask the same properties to processes that are not equivalent. Now, when it comes into generic internet voting, so you should not forget your systems. They need firewalls, they need antivirus. If you want to avoid denial of service attacks, you need to have the content delivery networks and so on. So these are standard protections and I'm not going to cover them in detail. Yeah. The next thing in 2021 you have to do is have an application that is designed in layers. So top layer is the lowest security layer, high speed. Lowest layer is the one with that requires more protection, and it doesn't require that much speed. So the top layer, we normally have only static content, and we deploy in content delivery networks. Middle layer, we have services without data that they are microservices that they need to scale very quick. If you have a peaks of loads of traffic, you deploy lots of microservices responding to that load. And then on the lower layers where you have your data from your voters, your votes, and so on. And of course, you have as well the HSM with the protection of the keys somewhere else. Good thing of these architectures is that every country can decide whether they want to have everything on premise, or if they want to have everything on the cloud, or a mix. It's completely open. So this kind of layered architectures with virtualized environments, they are really, really powerful today. This slide just is having some examples of the use of the blockchain. We are saying several nodes, and you can have some nodes that the Electoral Commission is controlling, and is where the data gets in, but you can have one node that is controlled by an international organization, or by auditors, or by observers. So, really, these blockchain capabilities can provide a lot of transparency to the process. And that's it. I don't want to extend anymore. I think I've covered the top technologies that can be used today to help secure online voting systems, and I'm sure the panelists will have a lot of fun discussing all of them in the next session as well. And I'm also open for questions.
Thank you so much, Pablo, for your timely presentation and for your time adjustment. In fact, there is a question for you, and since it's a fast one, maybe before introducing the panel, I can pass you this question. I don't know if you can read them. It's the last one, almost last one, written by Lara Lord. So maybe you like to read it. Yeah. Who is behind the blockchain you use to secure internet voting?
So there are many blockchain providers, yeah. And you can decide which one you want to use. We normally use an open source one that is the Hyperledger Fabric, yeah? But there are many other providers out there. The thing you have to always think, as I was saying before, elections are a process amongst humans, and we need to find what's the right technology to support that process. Yes, so thinking first on the technology will normally not help solving the issues. Yeah, but as I said, we in most cases we are using the Hyperledger Fabric.
Thank you so much. There is also another question about blockchain, but maybe this is something we can already move to the panel, and if so, I guess you can feel free to intervene again.
Yep.
Let me then.
I'll be around, but I'll disconnect the camera so that the panelists. Sure. Okay. Thank you for your time, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. So let me just fastly introduce the panel, and let me also thank the organization for bringing this interesting team together. I will just give you 1 minute if you can just tell us who you are. And let me start with Professor Melanie VOLKAMER. For one particular reason, she's the only woman in all the distribution of panelists that we have, which is clearly not corresponding with the reality of research, because I know that there are several women who are doing really interesting research, and I hope that in the future we can correct that. So at least in order to try to correct this, let me just give you the first opening, let's say, presentation.
Thanks, David. Yes, so my name is Melanie. I'm a professor at KIT in Germany. I have been doing research on various security challenges of internet voting for, I guess, more than 15 years now. What I also want to mention is that besides doing research, I have one mission, and that's enabling EMBs, so I guess several of you in the chat or in this call, to make informed decisions, both with respect to the question whether you want to use internet voting at all, as well as whether or which system you want to use. And sorry, Pablo, but having said this, I also want to make a reminder here to everyone. Pablo paid to get the floor here, and I'm pretty sure that most of the companies offering internet voting system would have promised you the same, but you should be careful with all the statements, because secure internet voting doesn't exist, because none of the systems are secure. We don't have 100% security, and you should go back to them and ask under which assumptions do you provide secure internet voting, because it's never 100% secure. Thanks.
So by allusions, if you don't mind, yeah, I think we've been clear from the beginning that we were sponsoring the event. Yeah? So
I just want to remind.
Yeah, that's okay. And I also said that internet voting will never be the same as face-to-face voting. It's replacing a flawed system that is postal voting with something that should be better. Yeah,
it should be better, yes.
Should be better. Yeah, that's it. So I think I've been very precise with my words. I've never claimed that there's anything as 100% secure, because in this world there is nothing 100% secure. Yeah, and that you know that. So it's nice seeing you, by the way. Thank you.
I think that can be something that we can further discuss later, but let me just continue introducing the people. I will go with DMYTRO KHUTKYY. I never know if I'm pronouncing correctly your surname, so please illustrate me how to pronounce it correctly.
Thank you, David. Yes, I'm DMYTRO KHUTKYY. So the K is silent, but I'm not. So I'm a policy and advocacy advisor at the European Digital Development Alliance. It's kind of a Europe-wide organization, and research fellow at the Polish Institute for Advanced Studies in Poland. So yeah, I was really interested in this kind of slide with the threats and kind of answers to them, because I have a kind of partially overlapping similar table, my paper on challenges and solutions of internet voting. Just David, please tell me when I can kind of jump in and comment, now or later.
I would do it later. I would just make a fast presentation of the other two members, and then we can start with that.
Perfect.
Thank you, DMYTRO KHUTKYY. Now I will remember. Let me then pass the word to Stephen Boyce to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, panel. Stephen Boyce with the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. We are a democracy promoting, capacity building nonprofit organization based in the United States. Have worked in just about every country since our existence in capacity building and the promotion of electoral systems. Certainly, I am the senior advisor on cybersecurity and technology, so I come to the EMB electoral world from a cybersecurity technologist lens, if you will, and so looking forward to the conversation today in regards to internet voting.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I left on purpose for the end ARNE KOITMAE, because he was already before previously introduced. So, you know, just ARNE, just if you want to say hello and to be sure that you're still here.
Yes, I'm still here. As I said before, we in Estonia have used internet voting since 2005 and continue to do so. Our next elections are in October this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arne. So I guess that it would be interesting to start directly going to one of the key elements of this possible discussion that is related to what Melanie was putting on the table and to what later DMYTRO was highlighting, on which are probably how can we understand the threats to cybersecurity and internet voting, and how can we fight them, and how can we increase the security up to the point that it would be let's say, acceptable by administration, citizens, and so on. Because here I understand that from the perspectives that we have in the different panelists, to which I also belong, but I will just try to restrict myself to give opinions when I'm just when I'm putting the questions. Cybersecurity plays an important role. And we have people who have practical experience, like it could be the case of ARNE, people who have experience more from a higher position, like it could be the case of Stephen or DMYTRO, and people who are witnessing that from the technical perspective, like it could be Melanie. So I would just like to bring the things together, and let's see if we can build a constructive discussion on this topic. Maybe since DMYTRO was interested on also putting this topic, I would let him start, and then we can continue. Let's just drop me a line if you want to continue after that, and also put questions on the Q&A if you would have them. So please, DMYTRO, if you would like to start.
Thank you. So I agree with the challenges that were raised on the PowerPoint, but also I would like to add 4 that were kind of not highlighted, but you can read more in my paper. So one of them is exclusion in 2 ways, legal and technical. So there is concern, and sometimes it's valid, it's not that people who are only digital savvy will be able to vote, or if that's you know, in terms of skills, capabilities, but also in legislation. Sometimes people who are only somewhere like outside the country are allowed to vote. So then it should be not instead of paper voting, but in addition to paper voting, and everybody should be able to use that. Or if people are not skilled, they should be allowed to do that, for example, in an administrative service center, like they come personally and vote online with some assistance, for example. There should be kind of backup solutions, including multiple voting and assistance. Technical exclusion can happen when people are not on the register. So when for some reason, for mistake or for some corruption or for some political reasons, people are not there. So then it's good that people should be able to check whether they are registered and with correct name, family name, whatever, and you know, report, appeal, and get back to the registry if they are not. Or for example, there are multiple people with the same name and they know it's something like false identities. And here blockchain solution comes handy, because you know, the worst situation is when a server disappears and all data is there, and then you lose like the whole voting campaign or the whole data. And blockchain allows to distribute this system among multiple parties, and people cannot control delete the system unless there is an agreement among all participants. So that's more reliable thing in this respect. Of course, there are other technical challenges, but still this looks relevant here. And of course, there are technical system malfunctioning of general issues, like hardware, software solutions, they were mentioned, but these are general approaches. We should just build contingency plans, run checks, tests of the system, things like that. And finally, the less technical is voting campaign discreditation. Like you can run a brilliant voting campaign in terms of ICT side. You can do everything you do, like people who are eligible to vote, they voted. But then, for example, political rival or somebody like party outside the system, like international, you know, enemy, can challenge the campaign itself, and then it will be legal but not legitimate for some parts of the country or for other governments. That's the problem. So if these things run via mass media, new media, with fake news, whatever, so then there should be like early discussion with experts so that everyone agrees, there is kind of social consensus in the country and outside that yes, this is a valid system from the legal point, technical point, public opinion is in favor of it, experts do not challenge it. Then there are, like, if key parties agree that yes, this is valid and we go on with this, there are higher chances. It will be really difficult to challenge it at the end, regardless of the outcomes of the election. So this is what I wanted to highlight here.
Melanie, would you like to add something to that and to bring again the topic of cybersecurity on the table?
So I think the first thing is, as you mentioned, both cybersecurity and verifiability. And I think it's important to understand that you need both. Traditionally, if we talk about cybersecurity, we want to have a system that is as robust against, for instance, denial of service attacks, so that the voting system is available during the entire voting period. You also want to have secure identity and authentication checks so that you can be sure that it's actually the voter that casts the vote. And you also want to have mechanisms in place so that not just one entity can break secrecy, because I think it was mentioned in Pablo's talk, if there's one key and one person has one key and can simply decrypt all the votes, that's something you want not to have. And these are typical requirements that you have and that are well understood in standards like ISO 001 and others. But then you also have verifiability. Now the question is, why do we need verifiability at all? And it's mainly because voting is fundamentally different from shopping, banking, because if there is a problem with respect to integrity in banking or shopping, you will notice it. You will notice that there's less money in your bank account, that you receive some goods that you never ordered and stuff like this. So you can notice it. But if you look to voting, it's different. If a manipulation happened, you don't know, because you just get the election result. And how do you know that the election, the election result actually reflects the cast votes? There's no way other than implementing verifiability. And it's also important that you have end-to-end verifiability. So actually as a voter, you can verify your vote, being it encrypted properly, being it communicated to the voting server properly, be it stored properly, and then tallied properly. So you really need to have end-to-end verifiability. And as it was also explained by Pablo, in order to get this, you need quite complex cryptography, and you need to be aware of the trade-offs, meaning what are the remaining risks. But what I first of all want to say is you need to be aware that you need security, and there are a lot of mechanisms that are well understood. But if it comes to voting, you definitely need verifiability, because otherwise there's no way for voters and candidates to trust. And if I may say one more sentence, David, I think there's a quite interesting question in the chat about, we have very complex systems because of the cryptography, and how do you actually ensure that people trust? And yes, from a technical point of view, I can say they can trust as soon as it's end-to-end verifiable, but I have a background in computer science, but many voters don't have. And so if we could discuss this, that would be very cool. Thanks.
Sure, the question of trust was on my list after that, so we will come back to that. Let me just first pass the words probably to Stephen and then to Arne, because both of them can bring a different perspective, and at the end Arne from the more practical perspective. But please, Stephen, go on.
Yeah, no, I think from a security standpoint, like I think the rest of the panel can certainly attest to, we've done a lot in the security world when we talk about a lot of the things of verification. But I think a couple of the concerning things that come about as it relates to online voting is the scale in which an EMB or a country may want to rapidly adapt to online voting. This requires extensive infrastructure, which majority of developed democracies don't even necessarily have, right? And so when you talk about verification of, when we talk in the computing world about identity and access management and having robust national critical infrastructure for cryptography verification, a lot of that unfortunately can't just be bought off the shelf today and then implemented into the next voting cycle. This requires certainly you know, as Ronan had mentioned in previous panels, for those of you who were listed, executive buy-in, and buy-in not just within your circle that you necessarily are comfortable at articulating, but also for the mass, for the non-technical, for the non-governmental, a whole of society approach. And this is where that capacity building comes into play. And exactly what Melanie was mentioning for the question is ensuring that voters, non-technical stakeholders understand in the most simplistic way that, you know, why it is secure, you know, what has been in place. When we talk about blockchain, it's certainly a newer technology, a newer word, but the hashing and the foundations around what makes blockchain what it is today has been around since, you know, the last century, right? And so it's ensuring that as we have these buzzwords and, you know, people will ask, well, do you think blockchain is secure? Well, the foundations of blockchain have been around for a while, but however, that missing piece of connecting what, you know, the buzzwords and what is being sold in the market or to EMBs in reality is really what's missing.
Thank you so much. And probably going to the most practical experience as a person who is managing an internet voting system, as it could be ARNE, maybe you can give us some ideas on how are you managing that from the Estonian perspective, but also, and jumping already to the topic of trust that have been already floating here, how are you ensuring that the Estonian citizens, how you keep the level of trust high on the Estonian citizens? And later we will continue with this debate about trust and so on, and I will give also one point. Please, Arne.
Thank you. First, I agree completely that internet voting cannot be 100% sure ever. We cannot simply provide this kind of solutions, but we can make it reasonably protected and secure. I very much like Pablo's slide with 3 layers of systems and risks connected to them, and we need to implement layers of security measures the same way to address all these problems and weak points. So in terms of security, what we need besides these technical measures is that we want our system to be as transparent as possible. The Estonian system has a source code that has been published for several years already, so we don't use like a black box or this is an important distinction, because you can either go with a commercial system and buy this in, or you can maintain your own system. This is what we are currently doing, and it has, of course, its own challenges. And then of course, you need to provide a way to verify the integrity of the vote. So we have individual verifiability where a person can check that the internet vote was received as cast. And we have universal verifiability in the sense that we can mathematically prove that none of the votes was altered, that no votes were included that were not supposed to be there, so we can check the integrity of the ballot box, internet ballot box, so to speak. And finally, we can also verify the count mathematically. And for that end, we also pay attention to observation and auditing. So we have data and process audit for each election, and also observers can monitor the processes, and they can also write their own audit application and audit the results themselves. And now a few words about trust. I noticed this question as well. I guess I guess the three underlying things that you want to have if you want to implement an internet voting system is that you have the underlying infrastructure, and for that you need to have a way of creating voter lists. So you have to have a voter register, a population register that is electronic. You have to have some sort of digital ID so that voters can authenticate and sign their votes, and finally also have to have trust. And in Estonia, I would say that trust in internet voting is related, is much related to the general trust in e-services provided by the government. So internet voting has become one government e-service, so to speak, amongst others. So it is, people are used to using internet, they're used to using ID cards. In the sense, the digital divide, so to speak, doesn't exist anymore because everyone is using internet, and they have access to computers. Also, the ID cards in Estonia are mandatory. So in this way, I guess if the system is well spread, the ID, electronic ID, and if we pay attention to transparency, verifiability, observation, audit, all these things, then we can also show the public that what we do is legit. And of course, there will always be people who don't trust e-voting solutions in principle, and those people cannot be persuaded. So this is something to be taken into account if you introduce an internet voting system. It is kind of a polarizing issue. In Estonia, most of the voters trust internet voting, but there is always a minority that does not trust. Thank you.
Okay, if I might also pop in also with my hat as a part of the panel, I would like just to add something, and that could also derive the question to others who would like to start adding things on the level of trust. I mean, in my case, and let me just say one thing. Arne, you have still the microphone on. As you might have seen, Arne, how can we mute him? Anyway. As you might have seen, one technical thing, the results of the survey that you had at the beginning popped in. So if you want just to check them, you can go to the poll and just see which are the results. And then I will just say my stuff. As by training, I am sociologist quite often. Meanwhile, I am surrounded by people who are working on terms of cybersecurity and cryptography and so on and so on. We are constantly putting the construction of the idea of trust on the technical side. And the system needs to be robust in order to ensure that people trust on that and so on, which is something that I fully agree. But for an important portion of the citizenry, trust is not built on the strength of the technological system that is supporting internet voting, but on the fact that it's showing its effectiveness and it's not having failures. In the case of Estonia, for example, I think that one important part of the portion of trust that people do have in the system is because from 2005 it was working uninterruptedly, and the people could trust that the system will continue working in the same way in the future. But that affects just the countries where internet voting has already been deployed and has already been working for several times. But if I would be an EMB of a new country who wants to start implementing internet voting, probably I need to consider other things in order to start building trust on the system, because this acquired trust on the fact that the system is ongoingly working properly, it's not existing yet. And in the Estonian case, we could see, for example, on the first time it was implemented in 2005, I think it was 1% of the population was using that. And now it's almost 43, 44% of the population. So the trust has been accumulated by a constant years, let's say, of successful implementation of the system. But when we try to translate that to another level, and that's my next question would come to all of you, how can we do that? How can we convince the citizens that the system is secure, and how can we convince an administration that they should take the risk of implementing one system that the technician says that it's secure, but maybe the citizens will not trust on the first elections or first couple elections until they will start building this kind of accumulated. So, question for all of you: how can we start building trust from the technological robustness? Or if there is no technological robustness, is it somehow crazy to start talking about trust if there would not be something behind? Please, who would like to continue? DMYTRO raised his hand. So first DMYTRO, then Melanie, and then Stephen, and we continue the same path. Sorry.
Thank you. I think a good point is some practical experience and some reality. So running pilots on small scale, low risk, high gain. So if something happens, it's not influenced like political situation in the country. For example, this can be even elections to the civic councils near ministries. I mean, in Ukraine, we have been doing this for like 5 years, you know. So we have internet elections in the country, but not of public officials, but of citizens in the civic councils near ministries, and that's working. I mean, have open code for the voting. Some of them are actually run on blockchain technology, of course, like small scale, but still, then people, you know, getting used to it, that okay, this is possible, this is happening, this is part of normality. And then if some technical issues emerge, and also like hacking issues, then they can be, you know, solved on this small scale, on these low risk cases, and then, you know, scale up, maybe really for foreigners living abroad, and then doing this on local elections, and only then passing on to national elections and like European scale or wider scale elections. That's would be my suggestion.
Thank you, DMYTRO. Melanie, please.
Yeah. So I guess people like David are better in talking about trust than myself, being a computer scientist. There's, at least from my experience, some things I can share. One is, I think it highly depends not only on, is it a parliamentary election or a kind of not that important election, but it's also a matter of the general trust in a country. Like I think in Estonia, I have been there observing, I think, one of the first internet elections, and it was amazing how much people trust, while in Germany, we have this Chaos Computer Club, and whenever you start talking about internet voting or electronic voting, they go to the media, they explain everyone how scared they are and how bad it is to use internet voting. And as they have this media presence, it's much more difficult to actually establish trust. So that's one thing I want to share, that I think it really depends on the setting in the country. The other thing is that what I also observed is that in particular now, due to the pandemic, people didn't have a lot of time to think of internet voting. And I think many people just thought it will work the same as shopping. So you give people credentials, they log in, they select their candidate, the system says, thanks for your vote, and at some point you have the result. And then you start talking with them about, wait a minute, you will not be able to detect manipulations. So you need verifiability. Oh, wait a minute, now it gets complex. Oh, I need cryptography that I don't understand. And why do I need to verify? So this makes, actually, on the one hand, I know, again, as a computer scientist, it makes things more secure. But for people, it first of all makes it more complex. And I'm really looking forward also to some research to see how we can communicate verifiability to them in a way that they are not scared afterwards, but they are more convinced that if you have verifiability, you actually get more than with postal voting. If you don't have verifiability, I personally would say you should not go for internet voting anyway. But yeah, that's the second thing that I wanted to share with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Stephen, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think one point about internet voting, certainly, you know, from an accessibility standpoint, I think we all share the benefits. But in more developing democracies where they don't necessarily prioritize a budget for voting, right? So if an election or national election, I should say, only happens once every 4 to 6 years, right? In years 1 through 4, crickets, right? Nothing's really happening. They're not really thinking about it. And I think this has been the historic way of not even just internet voting, but just how countries and EMBs think about voting, right? Or think about elections. It's not, unfortunately, a 24/7, 365 dedicated staff. It may be other civil servants who are pulled away from, say, the postal service or other civil, civil service services in a country in order to conduct the voting. And I think it's in those, what I consider more developing democracies, that, the idea of internet voting is being sold to them as something that can happen overnight. And it's something that we do as an organization, as IFAS, to really get them to really think through the scale of that, right? So starting small. So we talked about non-political or national elections. One of the things that we've seen the great success over, internationally, is the expatriate or the military servicemen and women voting, and having that, at scale in a country where you only have elections every 5 to 6 years or more. Think about the amount of time for the trust and the buy-in to take place, right? It may only happen 4 times in our lifetime, right? Or someone's lifetime, that the internet voting takes place. And so while we may not see the benefits necessarily for a national election in a developed or developing democracy, it's something to think about for the future, as you see over time that it's been working in a smaller scale, and it's more of the crawl, walk, run approach as opposed to just running straight to internet voting.
Thank you. And I would ask one last question that I had on my list, and then probably we can go through the Q&A to see if there is any other practical questions. So again, I would invite the audience to write the things that are not clear, but I would like to bring another topic. And I think like Melanie is reading my head because she's always advancing the topics that I'm going to talk in her answers. And my next question was related with COVID, thinking like COVID opened a new scenario for the discussion on electoral management, since suddenly we had a reason that make it more difficult to continue having elections in the same way that we were having them before. Suddenly several governments started looking at what is this thing about internet voting and how can I implement it? And that opens a set of questions like, I don't know, is this good or bad for internet voting? Because it can be good because it's bringing attention to the issue, but it can be bad because maybe some people are taking decisions too fast, and that at the end they can have a negative impact on that. So let me just ask about ARNE, because I'm pretty sure that he had a peak of people who were coming to Estonia to ask how the hell are you doing that, in order to try to introduce it to their own countries. And what would you recommend to them? Should they follow that? Should they think twice? I mean, just please give us your point.
Thank you. I would immediately caution against implementing internet voting very quickly and without due preparation. So that is not going to end well, like Melanie was already explained. So in terms of COVID-19, this indeed has sort of forced people to reassess the usefulness of internet voting. So we do indeed get a lot of questions about how to implement it, not just for general elections, but for all kinds of other elections as well. But I would still echo what the panelists before me said, that start small and start slow, and think everything through very clearly, and indeed think about openness of the system, verifiability, all these things, and how are you going to explain this to the general public. And again, if and another starting point to think about is indeed voter identification and voter ID. How are you going to do that? If you have a working solution for that, then things become a lot easier. So this would be the practical approach of the road to take, in my opinion.
Who would like to continue with that? Melanie?
So I can just say I'm really scared about what happened, in particular in Germany, because many people start using so-called black box systems. So they don't use advanced systems as they are used in Estonia. They just use anything. And why am I in particular scared is because they don't have verifiability, meaning they don't even would notice if something goes wrong. So I can already see the situation that once the pandemic is over, they say, oh, nothing happened. So let's just continue with this black box system. And they don't challenge and they don't go back. Why actually did I make this decision? Honestly, I can see it in particular at the beginning of the pandemic, why people had to go for these black box systems, because the alternative was probably not voting at all. But you should really be aware that you did it because the alternative was not voting at all. And as soon as you can go back to the polling stations and you can go back to postal voting, I would definitely argue you should take an approach like in Estonia, as it was mentioned here before, slowly. These are complex systems. You need to understand the risks in order to judge on the risks. You need to prepare the voters, and don't just use something that seems to be easy now, but that may destroy democracy in future. Thanks.
Mitro, please.
Yes, I think a solid approach would be to start with a feasibility study, really comprehensive analysis of the background, like legislation gaps, IT infrastructure. Then maybe run a public opinion survey, how many people do access internet, how many of them feel they're comfortable with it, how they, leaning or not towards internet voting. Have they voted online for any other, project or elections, like participatory budgeting? Maybe they already have experience. Maybe they, submit the petitions and they're fine with digital technologies, but we don't know about it because, not everything is clear when you talk about public opinion, right? And then, interviewing experts because expert community, as Melanie said, can, raise voice and alarm about what's happening. So you should, get in touch with key stakeholders and make sure what are their concerns? Will they rebel about the system that's about to be introduced or not? And then also talk about public officials, I know there is like American, maybe British tradition of talking about a government, like a whole unified system. While in practice, they be, different departments, ministers, they can, have kind of internals, clashes between each other. And some might be, really digitally optimistic, while others pretty conservative. And you don't have a warfare inside the government around a voting system, right? So you should make sure that all the stakeholders agree, and then the slide will show you what are the missing links, what are the weak spots. Maybe run a bug bounty test of a system, but of course not make it like the DC case, which like scared everyone. Wow, we hacked it. We just went through the Wi-Fi system and everything corrupt. No, just make it kind of, I don't know, internal, or not that much, noise about it, but really kind of solid study from all aspects, legal, technical, governmental, public opinion ones. And then it will show, is it realistic right now or not? Can you go over small steps, or you need like more preparation? That's really my proposal.
Thank you, Dmitro. Stephen, would you like to add to that?
No, nothing else to add. I think I agree with what everyone else just said. I really liked that feasibility study that Dmitro just presented. I think that would serve a lot of EMBs, a lot of countries very well as they explore this new phenomenon, if you will. But just wanted to touch on what Melanie mentioned about the black box. One of the things that I've heard. And one of my first questions is from a data perspective, when you are just going and buying these commercial off-the-shelf tools, from a legal perspective, does the respective country have any data governance laws about where this data is being stored and or transversing through. And I think, I've spoken to a lot of the different experts in academia in regards to the blockchain, and certainly being able to limit, certainly the nodes to a particular country. But this is something that a lot of democracies are not necessarily thinking about, right? Where is that data being routed through or being stored? You may not, if from a cloud-based solution standpoint, if you're just grabbing something, a black box off-the-shelf tool, there may not be infrastructure set up in your country at all, right? And so it may be being stored in a friendly country or not so friendly country. So it's a lot of things to think about as it relates to internet voting. And again, goes back to what the entire panel says about being very particular and careful and thought out as you embark on this journey for internet voting.
Thank you, Stephen. Maybe you could just finish passing this question about data management to ARNE and asking how are you managing this data, because I was also checking the Q&A, and I think that the questions that are reminding there either have been responded, or either they would open a discussion that would take 1 hour and I think we don't have this time, so we don't find any kind of question that could serve for the last 5 minutes. So maybe Arne, you would like to tell us how are you managing the data in Estonia, as just one example of how can it be done, and maybe that can bring to some other ideas to the audience or to the rest of the panel. So Arne, please.
Yeah, well, the short answer is that we manage data locally. So our partner here is the State Information System Agency that provides hosting during internet voting. We do have a state cloud in Estonia, but we don't use it for internet voting. So our system is not a black box system in a way that was described before, because we own the code, we install it and configure it ourselves, and therefore we can also verify every point of the system by ourselves.
Thank you so much. Then I will just make a final statement on my own, and then we can close that. I think that, and bringing it back to the topic of COVID, one of the interesting things that happened is that many administrations, they discovered that they had some technology available that they could solve some problems by thinking how can they use this technology in a more efficient way. And for example, there are some countries that were using e-identification systems, but the e-identification systems were absolutely underused, and suddenly they discovered that they can give, let's say, a second life or a second use to that by using another things. But I kind of agree with some of the things that have been said, that probably we need to think carefully about what will remain after COVID. I mean, hopefully we will get rid of this pandemic and we will come back to some sort of normal life. And after that, there needs to be a process of rethinking which are the positive things that we can take from that, and which are the things that we need to say, okay, stop, think twice, and think how to transform that into something that could be secure and it will not bring further problems in the future, as some of you stated here. And somewhat that was the last thing I wanted to say, and I think that with that we could already close the topic, we could close the panel, and we could close the overall session. First of all, let me thank to all of you, Melanie, DMYTRO, Stephen, Arne, and the previous speakers and the organization for organizing that. I think it's interesting to bring different people, different ideas, different concepts, and different perspectives to this topic, that it's always enlightening and enlarging a bit the perspectives, that the individual perspectives that we might have. And I have, thanks also to the sponsors of the meeting, to Indra. Thanks for all of you attendees for coming and listening us in our discussions. And I received a message here that the recordings of the session will be sent by email to all the people who registered. So that's it. Thank you all for coming, and I hope that it was interesting for all of you and you enjoyed with the debate. I did doing that.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, and have a nice day.
I want to say thank you to everybody that joined today and all the panelists. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you also, Pablo. And thanks to JORDI for his previous organization, of course.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Muchas gracias.